Hello, welcome back to the Yogi's Roadmap podcast. My name is Shinay Tredeau, and we loved having Sherry on so much that we brought her back for another conversation. I'm once again joined by Bhavani Maki and Sherry Cassedy. Welcome, ladies.
Thank you.
Aloha. Hey.
A little bit about Sherry. Sherry is a teacher, a published author, wife, mother, and grandmother. She brings a wealth of understanding as a lifelong practitioner of Catholic mysticism, spirituality, and her deep love of yoga. She holds a master's degree in transpersonal psychology. She is a lawyer for over 35 years and a longtime student and teacher of Patanjali's Yoga Sutra. Sherry shares spiritual conversation and mystic insights regularly with her weekly Monday yoga satsang and Friday online gospel reflection. Sherry also edited Bhavani's first book, The Yogi's Roadmap. So we invited Sherry back to have a deeper conversation, and I have some more questions for her today.
Great.
Ladies, I'm thrilled to be here with you, and I'd like to start by asking you, Sherry, about your book, Marriage Unveiled, which, as Bhavani pointed out, we're recording this conversation on Easter Monday, and it's a wonderful launching off point
Yeah.
for this time of connection. And what word did you use, Bhavani?
Resurrection in terms of marriage.
Perfect.
Well, right. Death and resurrection.
Death is in the fine print until you resurrect from your last death. Through sickness back into health.
Yeah. So, thank you. I'm happy to be here with you again, and I'm really happy to talk about marriage as kind of another point of entry, really, into practice, or practice being another aspect of marriage. So, I published a book in 2022 entitled Marriage Unveiled: The Passion, Pitfalls, and Promise of Imperfectly Ever After. So, really trying to bust the myths, unveil the realities of marriage, but that it's not going to be perfect and it's not going to be pretty at times. But that doesn't mean that it's not our path or that it's not meaningful. So there's like a serious discernment that's going on throughout the marriage. And it's also about this idea of incarnation and embodiment that we're talking about with both the yoga and Catholic traditions. So marriage is the embodiment of the teachings about loving ourselves, loving our partner, or loving others as ourselves, and what that looks like, and that interface. The Dalai Lama says that ethics is the inextricable interface between your desire to be happy and mine. And I would say marriage is that inextricable interface between your desire to be happy and mine, and how we meet each other, and how we um, embrace each other and support each other and love each other and really challenge each other to to the point of death, to the point of having to surrender, to have to really look at ourselves when we come to that point where it's sort of me or you, babe. Like, I can either stay true to what I think is true for myself, or I can allow what you're pushing, what you're pressing me into. Um, and that's this uh, edge of transformation, right? So that we're transforming one another in this process. And it's not pretty and it's not comfortable. It's like this person who knows you better than anyone else in the world is right there pushing your buttons. And so Bhavani talks about this brilliantly in terms of yoga sadhana and asana, and how it is meant to stir us up, right? It's meant to bring up our stuff, to make the invisible visible so that we can work with it. And we're doing that in our marriage as well. And so we can have a yoga teacher or a therapist who gets to that point where we can no longer maintain our own illusions about ourselves. Something has to give. So maybe say, oh, I don't like this yoga anymore. I think I'll go do Pilates or something else. Or, this therapist really doesn't understand me and doesn't get it, and I'm out. Or this relationship is no longer serving me. And in any of those circumstances, if it's because we're being challenged to look at patterns or change patterns for ourselves, likelihood is that the Pilates class or the next therapist or the next relationship, we're going to get to the same place. Right. So just a word about the book. It's really trying to dispel some of the myths about happily ever after, and that, yeah, if two people make a commitment to spend their lives together and are both growing and changing and vibrant individuals, there's going to be some friction. And from that friction can come mutual growth, individual growth, expansion. But yeah, so it's our story. It's the story of my marriage with my husband of 45 years and my thoughts after practicing family law, working with divorcing couples for 40 years. So there's a lot kind of packed into a kind of, I think, a pretty tidy story and invitation.
That's brilliant. I was thinking about how we talked about that last time. Bhavani, you are reaching or have just reached the 30-year mark in your marriage. And Sherry, you have been married for 45 years. My husband and I, we've been married for 10 years this fall, which is wild to think about. And I feel like I'm just now getting to know him. We've been together for a total of 15 years. And, when I say those numbers, it seems like nothing, but 10 years is not nothing, but it's building something. And so it's really wonderful to hear those, stories of that friction actually builds a fire of love, so to speak. And I'm wondering if you have just a little bit more. I mean, I have a lot of questions, but more to say on maybe you have a story or something that comes to heart, as Bhavani says, in terms of the marriage fire of love.
Mm. Yeah, lots. So there's one story that kind of is the arc for the book, and I'll leave that to the reader. But I think, I start out by talking about very early on in our marriage, in like the second year of marriage, and we had a small child right away. So second year of marriage of the 1-year-old, and I was in law school, and my husband was in his psychology doctoral program. So we're both students, and we're both going through massive changes of identity through this kind of education and career development. And we got this new baby, and we're now like attached to each other because somebody's got to be with the baby. And there's just so much change going on. And there was a huge amount of conflict. And it was really disconcerting because I didn't know that was part of the package. And so when I found myself really disillusioned and struggling, I felt like, well, I guess this is what happens. This is now just a loveless marriage. And I got this, adorable little guy, and we've got to stay together and make this work. And it was really frightening because it didn't feel like I could really talk to anyone about it. If I couldn't talk with him, then how could I talk to someone else? Anyway, it was isolating. It was frightening. And we sort of slowly crawled our way back to communication. And I talk in the book about some different tools of ways to have conversations, to have tender conversations, even in the midst of conflict. And we eventually worked our way out of that without kind of, as Rilke says, without even noticing, right? You live your way into the answer. And I was surprised a couple years later when I felt like, wow, this is great. Like, we're back. This is so, and I didn't know to anticipate that. So I think for me, that's important for people to know. And I talk about it as the muck of marriage when you're just like struggling. And there isn't any kind of cultural information out there that says, yeah, that's what happens. That's normal. That's okay. And you can work through that to the other side. Where I think the cultural message is this very romanticized idea of happily ever after, so that when you struggle, it's like, well, I must have married the wrong person. So let me go back to the beginning of the game and start over. But so yeah, I think that for me was a really important message to get across, because I don't feel like that message is out there in the culture.
It reminds me when Rama first came and quoted Mr. Iyengar, and she said, he would say, when you want to get out of the poses, when it begins. And immediately I heard marriage. It's like, when you want to get out of the marriage is when it begins. And a really powerful image from the mystic tradition of yoga is that, Lord Shiva, who lives above the snow line, where there's nothing is moving, everything is in this place of stasis. And it's pretty graphic, but I think our audience can handle it. He's, meditating with his eyes closed, his third eye is open, fully aroused, in a fully aroused state, and he's completely turned on by the non-physical. And then Parvati, she's been, desiring her soulmate and looking for who is somebody who, I feel like, I was born and my other half is missing. And she finds this guy, Shiva, who's like dressed in tiger skins, and he never combs his hair. He's completely feral. He's got the jata. And she decides that, she wants him as her lover. And so he's Shava. He's actually dead to the world. So she climbs on top of him, and she, initiates him with her life-giving juices and awakens that part of him, which is hibernating, right? So, as much as maybe, I can sit here and think about all the ways that my husband was maybe inert, maybe more of a doer instead of like the feeler or the communicator that I am. He's much more stoic. And of course, that's a perfect balance for me. Within a larger scope, he woke things up in me too. It stirs things up. And this is where it's so crazy what we do. I mean, like you said, I think in your opening line in your book, we have no idea what we're getting into.
Right.
We have no idea. And yet somehow, like if we're lucky as we are, when I think about it, like with Ray, I literally knew him really like 2 weeks and he proposed. I mean, it was just so fast and furious, but it was so clear. It sounds silly, but or trite, but literally our epistemology, our devotion to this thing that was above the tree line, this sense of anchoring in our soul mission was so aligned. And it's been the thread in our marriage, it's like having that, because you do go through so many changes. My God, I think especially women, you're a completely different animal in the pregnancies, every PMS, every, then perimenopause, there's so many phases. And Sherry's been there for me a few times. I mean, I've kicked Ray out 3 times in 31 years of marriage. And it was interesting, like by creating that standard and that boundary, it was kind of like, there's certain things which you're willing to compromise, and then there's certain ones that are non-negotiables. And you literally, it's like being in that tension. Of course, you want to choose the love, but the coming back and just seeing how a marriage can change in a day. Sometimes it takes 2 years to get there.
Right.
But it actually, like, it can completely change. And you really do cleave, right? Like they become more, not to create hierarchy, but they're more family than family because they're chosen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And cleave, David White talks about the word cleave, which means coming together and it means pulling apart. It's both at the same time, which is so much what it is. And here, are all of these couples struggling, trying to make that discernment of, is this a non-negotiable for me? Is there something I need to learn and re-examine, or is this really not healthy for me? And because we don't have a healthy cultural understanding around marriage, you see people who are in really destructive relationships staying because they think this is just the way it is. This is just my cross to bear. And you see really positive growth, healthy relationships ending because it's not supposed to be like this. We're not supposed to argue. We're not supposed to struggle. So trying to give some guidance to help people do their own work, just like in yoga, where we have to really be brutally honest with ourselves in our own discernment of our practice. But knowing that it can be imperfectly ever after.
I always felt like actually the best wedding gift you could give a couple is marriage counseling. Like, just get it, do it now. You know what I mean? Like, really, it's a good, not to be pessimistic anyway. I seem to recall, Sherry, you at one point, I think I was in the throngs of perimenopause and we were in a separation, and you shared with me that you had a client who ended up breaking off her marriage, and then in retrospect saying, I wish I'd understood that that was menopause.
Right. Yeah, she came back to me years later. We ran into each other in another connection, and she wanted to talk, and we sat down, and she said, I think that what was really going on for me was menopause and stirring up all of this negativity, which I then projected onto my husband. And it was the marriage that was the target, right? And that takes a lot of self-reflection to even be able to see that, especially after the fact, and painful
I
to
mean,
both.
and in some ways that's almost like putting it in a vacuum. I had this one teacher, and I was doing structural integration, and I was kind of like, glistening, and he said, "Are you working too hard?" And I said, "No, I'm just having a hot flash." And he goes, "Oh, I survived menopause."
Well, I was going to say that.
It was like, it's a shift for the entire family. Like, you just don't have the bandwidth, and you start cutting apron strings, and it's an opportunity for everybody. But that's true. Whatever situation's going on as a couple, you're going to feel that within the family system.
Right. It may be the loss of a job. It may be another kind of health crisis, or it may just be cyclical menstruation or menopause. But that change comes in and it disrupts the system, and it kind of shows all the underbelly of what's going on. So when I would be having a or not menopausal, but a menstruation, PMS kind of episode, which were intense for me. There's a lot of emotional upheaval. And my husband might want to say, oh, well, it's just that. And it's like, it's not just that.
Wrong
It's like,
answer.
that's stirring it up, but what's up is real, even though the catalyst may be these emotional cycles. So I think the men or the partners end up going through the changes whether they like it or not, because it's the change agent is sort of this. And you know, men have their phases too. They're not as obvious necessarily. Yeah.
Oh
It's
my
true. That's
God, this
always
is so good.
my first advice
And
when someone's like, when they're about to have the baby. And of course, they think it's all about the birth. And I'm like, I pull the husband aside or the father or the partner. I'm like, just get ready. Like, it's going to be very intense. You can't take it personally. You know, she's gone through this total death experience and then coming out and having this dependent on her. Like, you just have to give her infinite slack and patience. That's something that they don't tell you either, you know?
right. Yeah. Well, and the other thing I would say, Shinay, is celebrate every anniversary, but especially these markers like 10 and 20, et cetera, you know, to celebrate, because it's a huge accomplishment. And also culturally, we don't do a very good job of celebrating marriage. Yeah.
I mean, I can't believe it feels like longer than 10 years to me. And I met Jesse and Shinay. They came to Kauai for their honeymoon and did yoga with me. I was like, wow. This marriage might last if it can last.
I know. I mean, I feel same. I mean, I feel incredibly lucky. There were so many moments where I was like, I'm out of here. I'm gone. This is, you know, and I'm so glad I stayed.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to go back. I'm going to kind of do these questions from the bottom up because it was something you were saying before of like, that's a great entryway to surrender as a practice. This word is often very triggering for some people. I really like the word personally because it feels to me like it's kind of like offering it up. Like it's not about me. It's larger than me. Um, and at the same time, it doesn't mean I don't have choices, but this whole notion of like, you know, relationship as an entry point. And as Bhavani often says, you know, yoga is relationship. I find that so many of these practices, I was raised in a spiritual community and they've prepared me. I've prepared my whole life for marriage and mothering in one way or another. And it's a really wonderful moment in time and extremely challenging. And I don't feel like as women we talk about it enough, you know,
Hmm.
just in the ways that it can be so challenging, but in a way that I want that challenge.
Hmm. So one thing that I think is really interesting, which is definitely an issue in Christianity and Catholicism with women, and I think in a lot of spiritual traditions, right? That women are given the message to surrender.
Mm.
And my question is, to who? So what? You know, like, what am I surrendering to? And do I trust that? You know, and if it's surrendering to um, an idea around patriarchy, yeah, I don't think so. I'm not surrendering to that. But anyway, it's one of those tensions, I think, particularly for women, where some of the spiritual traditions teach women differentially to surrender, to sacrifice, you know, to give up ourselves for the other, or for the church, or for the tradition. And there's a part of it where women need to reclaim that. So it's kind of, I think, more of a tension in a way. But I think surrender as a practice is it just keeps going deeper and deeper. There's a Greek word kenosis, which is to let go. It's this letting go, and it's really this dissolving in service of. So in the Catholic tradition, Jesus has teachings about the grain of wheat that has to fall to the earth and die to then yield the harvest, or the salt that goes in and dissolves to create the spice, or the yeast that has to dissolve to create the leaven. So kenosis is this idea of letting go, surrender, in service of new life and renewal and something new, resurrection. So we're sitting here on Easter Monday, and we've just gone through this period, the Triduum in the Christian tradition of Good Friday, with Christ pouring himself out, really completely pouring himself out on the cross for humankind. And then the glory of, which we don't know is coming, but the glory of resurrection. So I think that's really powerful, and I think there are just layers and layers and layers of letting go. And we do our practice, and we kind of let go. Maybe we let go of the image of the pose, and we start to feel into the pose, and then we have to let go of the next piece and the next piece, um, until we really dissolve all the layers. And I'm really interested, Rama talks about letting go a lot. Bhavani is talking about it and really teaching it more and more with this structural integration,
Yeah.
and the dropping in rather than the pulling up, and that aspect of letting go, or of vairagya, of finding that surrender actually in our physical body.
Yeah, I'm actually just been writing about this, where it's that samveganam, tivra samveganam asanaha. For those who are like deeply invested and they're putting love into what they're doing, they're already successful. Successful is so close. It's right here. It's right here. But with that closeness, there's even a sense of it like, it's that growing tension. And that word samveganam is also used in Buddhism, and it speaks about like when you have your priorities, you're able to let go of the dead weight. And so, when I feel into Easter, and having just given, my Easter celebration, which is the biggest shindig I throw every year, like in Greece, you dye the eggs with onion skins, and they come out this really interesting red. It's like a Menses kind of a red. And there's so much, Christ is awesome, but he's kind of the new kid on the block, as far as when it comes to these seasonal traditions. So you're really, the egg and the symbol of renewal, and this sense of you're coming out of the the meal that we share is more based on my Nordic roots, which is where it's like you're eating these foods, and it's the first herb that comes out of the ground after the subarctic winter is dill and asparagus, and the dairy is the first dairy that's been produced where the cows have had fresh spring greens. And so you really have this sense of like, okay, we're coming out of the darkness and the sun is rising again. So for me, surrender is, and actually this came up in a conversation with Mariana, in my trials and tribulations, and being able to pull Nico through. And it was like, as much as I was overthinking everything and all the things I could do. And then, of course, I felt like God was punishing me because why was it so hard for me? And every other idiot was getting pregnant. Like, why couldn't this idiot get pregnant? People who didn't want it, And she was like, well, there's what's happening, and there's everything you can imagine. And then there's things you haven't even imagined. And that to me opened up like this space for the divine. Like, thank God I'm not in control, but I'm keeping my vision on the long haul. And so certainly that comes up in marriage, right? Where it's like sometimes actually I'm not willing to give up or give in on certain things. I know I can't convince him, but like literally, like when you're starting to look at things, you made it through 10 years, that's a big deal, right? You start to see things in a different context. And then also to be able to see things in hindsight and be like, oh, if that hadn't happened, then this wouldn't have happened. I thought it delayed us, but actually it was preparing us. So um, it's really like being able to lean into that grace, and things usually work out pretty good. You know what I mean? I mean, we're gonna have to, my ideas of what I thought marriage would be or what I thought yoga would be, etc. They were too confining and they were too narrow. And my mother used to say, you can't have everything, but you can have something really special.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think that that's very tied to the practice of surrender is holding mystery or holding unknowing. So yes, I started my book on marriage with the quote from Wendell Berry where he says, when we marry another, we marry the unknown. And the only way we can marry another is by marrying the unknown. And we're stepping into that mystery. I just listened to an interview with some spiritual teachers interviewing Riaz Motan, who is a spiritual teacher himself, I think in the Buddhist tradition, but I was not familiar with him at all. And he was just diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer a year and a half ago. And so he's been reflecting through his treatment and through his slow demise around letting go. He's written a piece called Don't Know, Can't Know, Don't Need to Know. And it's those layers, right? So the first layer is, okay, well, I don't know. And then, okay, I can't know. And then, all right, I actually don't need to know, but I'm going to work in this mystery. And just talking about the layers and layers of letting go that he's had to go through, which reminds me, Bhavani, of the satsang that we went to together to Baba Haridas. And one of his students was, so how do I know, how do I know when I'm enlightened? And Baba Haridas writes on his chalkboard, better not knowing. Don't worry about it. Because our idea, if we cling to our own idea of even what that enlightenment or that perfection might look like, it's still so limited that we're only limiting ourselves. So one, the illusion of control, that we can actually make it happen a certain way, but that also we know and we're directing that. And to let go into the mystery is a grace, trusting that there's a force moving that is more benevolent and more magnificent than we can even imagine.
There's so many wonderful layers to that. I mean, I'm just relaying it to, getting pregnant, and it's like you can have all the right ingredients, a yoga practice, a marriage, and that sense of like the quickening, and where the mother who's change, and sometimes change doesn't come quick enough, she's the womb and she's the tomb. So in that place of this, it's like in the Chidambaram temple where Lord Shiva is, it's where he actually danced Tandava for Patanjali. I really want to go there one day, but I haven't been there, but someone who did told me how in the main shrine room, there's, this fantastic murti of Nataraja and Shiva. And then there's a dark, empty area, which is painted black, and it's a void. And it represents the goddess, because even when she's not there, her presence is known. So that mystery is such a beautiful place. And, perhaps we have this sense of urgency that if we don't know, we're not in control, or we're going to flounder or make a fool of ourselves. And yeah, you really need a sense of humor in life. You do.
That's so true.
You don't even know this, Shinay, but last week after we finished or 2 weeks ago when we did our thing here with Sherry, and we're talking about humility and hummus and being brought down to earth, I fell. Literally an hour afterwards, I'm on the floor. I twisted my ankle. I fractured my nasty finger, as Nico would call it. And I'm just like there, like in pain, crying and laughing, like, okay, heard, like being brought. You think your legs are underneath you. You think the ground is underneath you. And like that, it's we have to have a sense of humor. And then Nico broke his arm last week.
Oh no.
And another student fell, and like people everywhere. So be careful out there, folks,
We've been breaking dishes all week.
Opa! We say that's a breakthrough,
Oh, thank God.
Yes. I don't know, breaking your own finger, but anyway.
Oh, it's
Yeah.
just brilliant. I want to touch on one more question before we end, because this is the Easter weekend that we're talking, and something that's near and dear to my heart, but we touched on just last time, is in the yoga tradition. And I'm assuming in the Catholic and Christian tradition, and maybe we need to start at the beginning of that tradition, but it's this misconception of ascension and leaving this plane of existence for maybe another higher, better realm. And so, yeah, we touched on that a little bit in our last conversation, but I thought it was so beautiful, Sherry, how you brought it back to your embodiment practice, but yoga as an embodiment practice. And I'd love for you both, Bhavani and Sherry, to say more about how either in your own practice and teaching, but you bring that back home to the body. Talk about hummus and falling down to the
Thanks.
earth.
I'm still eating dirt over here.
There's nothing like breaking a bone to bring it right back home.
I think that one of the things that for me was really powerful, because I tend to be more in my head than in my body. And that was part of the captivation of being Bhavani's student, because as we're in the yoga poses, she's teaching the Sūtra, right? Or we do her Tuesday evening relax deeply, and you're just sort of in a various restorative pose or yin kind of pose, and she's reading from Rumi, or she's teaching, and it's going into your cellular being in a very different way than if you were sitting in a circle with your pens and notebooks. So I think there's that part of embodiment, and then the other part of it is how our body will bring up the stuff that we're not addressing, so that it becomes embodied, because there's something going in the body that as we attend to it, other issues come up, and we realize that it is all connected, so that we need to do that work. And in the circumstances of our life, that we're confronted with things in the world, I would say, especially right now, there's so much grief and chaos and disorder in the field, that that we if we try to spiritualize out of it, then we're not in the world, but not of it. We're just pretending that we're somehow disengaged. And that's not what detachment is. It's not about indifference or disengagement, right? It's about actually being in the world, but not of it. And it's that through our human experience, through our physical body, we start to unpack some of those layers, which are really then again the layers of detachment. So there's first the realization of where my mind goes and how I get sparked and my outrage or my anger or my resistance, and then having to look at that and starting to understand it and unravel it and notice it when it comes up, and notice what it does to my body and how I'm physically nervous system responding. And in the Catholic tradition, that's also very much the case in terms of the sacraments, the outward signs of the inward grace, the rituals that are physically embodying the teachings. So I think it's misguided in both traditions to try and spiritualize out of the body or out of the world, and that it's going to be the path of descent, the path into the body and into our circumstances where the rubber meets the road and we want to get out of the pose, and the pose begins because we have to start really doing the work.
And being transformed, right? Even that, thank you, Sherry, that was really rich. Third Sūtra. Tadadrashtuhu svarupe vasanam. And I just learned in the Vibhuti-pada, avasta. So that means where you're coming to land in yourself, and essentially that you have this substratum in what, did I talk about this last week? Am I reiterating?
I think
A
so.
little bit, but keep going, please.
Okay, so basically, this is back to that cyclical thing. So there's kind of like the raw matrix, your chitta of stuff that you are, and there's a presentation of it. And avastanam is where there's an alchemical transformation and certain attributes become, how shall I say, they're not really nullified. Because in that sutra, it also says nothing completely disappears, but it just sinks deep, deep, deep. It's like, in the tomb place, and there's a transformation of the stuff of who you are that you always were, but it's a complete transformation. So when we look at, yogic metaphysics, this is the real heavies that are out there, the ones who aren't just giving lip service, but the ones who really live in this transcendent state, which, by the way, you don't get to just float above, you got to go through stuff. They speak about, these states of samadhi, they have there's definite physiological shifts that are happening. Dr. Svoboda speaks about it. It's like we do the asanas to churn the juices, the neurochemistry. We're changing our neurochemistry. We're also, the way that the yogis use the asanas were to work with their endocrine systems, not to get yoga butts or abs. They were literally working, squeezing and milking these glands and developing, this psychedelia, would be the Greek, which is like ultimate psyche. We get the word psychedelia. But, when you look at plant medicines, what they're doing is they're often just kind of like neutralizing inhibitors in our own brain. We have all of this stuff within us. So it's a different way of seeing and living. And I wish I had annotated it, but I did find somewhere in my trove of treasure books that in yoga, it said that it is only through a woman that you come to a spiritual awakening. Everyone is born through a woman. Okay, so whether it's your mother or your daughter or your sister or your wife. And in the yogic tradition, it said that, like, people get stuck in these intermediary phases, fairy rings, they become demigods, hemi-demons, and they're spiritually inert. So they have to come back into the human form. They have to be squeezed through the birth canal. It's very possible that the chitta vritti that we have aren't just psychological inheritance and nervous system inheritance, but even the way that we spiral out of the womb can be the why we're kind of twisted some kind of a way. There's so many aspects to it. So it's always been about embodiment and what role does our body play in the retentive nature of, keeping the wisdom alive for the next generation. They don't have to go through it again. The transformation of our own neurochemistry, our polyvagal tone, the way we can socialize with one another. This, it's like the Buddhists say that a human birth is so rare and so special. It's as rare as a swan surfacing up through the water and landing with a golden ring around its neck. So, like, we've hit the jackpot. And I'll quote Paula, my good friend Paula, and she said, nobody said it was going to be easy. And then as Ray, my husband, would say, if it was easy, it would already be done and everybody would have done it, So we're definitely being midwifed in this process. And we spoke about this a while back, remember, about all the senses we come in with, the 5 senses, but then we have all these other sense of justice, sense of harmony, sense of humor, sense of kindness, sense of trust, sense of beauty, sense of harmony. They're like, what an incredible vehicle we've been given.
I just want to mention one book that was really powerful for me in exploring the embodiment when I had a major health issue and a surgery and was able to spend some not so quiet time in the hospital. But I was listening to this book on tape then about 20 years ago, but it's Anatomy of the Spirit by Carolyn Meese. And she looks at the chakra system and she relates each of the chakras with one of the 7 sacraments in the Catholic tradition. So it's a lovely interweaving of the traditions in the physical body. So it's I would recommend it as a meditation.
It's a great book. I really enjoyed it. The whole 7 sacraments completely eluded me. I don't remember that part at all, but I didn't get raised with that mysticism. It's really a rich book. Yeah. And just circling back, as far as the tradition of marriage and where it comes from, in the Greek Orthodox tradition, well, that they chant the vows, and I'll do my best because I don't speak ancient Greek, but it's like Keton andras naton agapai to ginekon ke gineka na fovai ton andras. So the husband, agapi, the wife, and the wife, fovia, the husband. The wife should fear the husband. The husband should love the wife. And the way that so then, of course, the way you show your wife love, so yeah, I was, as a little girl, every Greek person would be like, oh, you're going to marry a Greek, aren't you? And I was like, absolutely not. Like, I was 100% clear, and it was in the vows, to this day, they're in the vows. Crazy, huh?
Wow. I remember just after I gave birth, I had my acupuncturist came over just to do a few like pressure points on Luca and myself, no needles, but she just sat with us and it was early. It was like, 1 week in, and she she said she's a recovering Mormon. She grew up, she was like fourth generation Mormon, but left the church and has a beautiful story about that, and then became a Chinese medicine doctor. And she looked at Jesse and I and she said, there's something about the birth space and the death space that's very sacred. She said, I don't know about you, but I've never been in a sacred space that was whitewashed and clean and pure and pristine. It's always had a little bit of blood or, food, like food in it or something of substance. And that just reminds me, of like, yeah, and it was so true, and it totally landed for me in my body of like what a sacred space those kind of portal moments are. And I think about, the feast that you just served yesterday, Bhavani, in terms of like food is for me very sacred and can be a little bit messy and a little bit, chaotic, but it's very much in the body and, feeding the body some beautiful substance. And, blood can be the same way. I'm not a squeamish person, but it's like very much like, oh, I broke a bone, or, oh, a baby came out, or something of this regard. And it's very primal, it's very earthy. And how those sacred spaces, I think about that. I'm just starting my garden, but like having the hands in the soil of like, oh yeah, there's something very embodied about these sort of mundane, everyday things like having a baby, but at another level, it's very um there's like a portal. It's like yeah, I can't remember the word I was looking for, but this space of transformation that comes through.
I will eat and I will be eaten. And I'm eating now, and I'm it's that sense of the debt that we owe the creatrix, but we're going to feed her well. We're going to completely give ourselves into her being. Yeah, even it's like I don't know how other cultures celebrate it, but in Greece, it's like you have lamb for Easter. You are eating the Lamb of God. It's a form of communion, and that sense of, we're eating and we're being eaten. The womb
Mhm.
and the tomb.
Well, yeah, the body and blood, the communion and the sharing of the physical body.
Sex too, what comes in there, but maybe that's a conversation
Yeah,
for another
yeah.
day.
Yeah, I had a
Those of you who are serious yoga practitioners, they say none of those magical fluids should go to waste. They should be consumed. So
I
of
had
course,
a priest friend tell me at one point that that sexual intercourse was as close to the communion of the body and blood of Christ as we can accomplish in this human. I would include pregnancy, birth, lactation, but he was talking about sex, and I was just like, oh my God, I just got the Catholic Church out of my bedroom. I'm not letting them back in. But it's a really powerful reflection in terms of talk about embodiment, both in terms of sexuality and absolutely in terms of motherhood. Yeah.
yeah. What is it la petite mort or le petit mort?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know.
Can't remember, but the French word for the little death, which is the orgasm and that consummation. Yeah, hey, I'm happy I have a body. There's a lot of, remember Lutska, tall Lucy one day, she's from Czech Republic, and she was just like, isn't it amazing all the things we can do with our bodies? It really is. It
Yeah.
really
Really
is.
is.
So that's where I love, we're kind of circling back to our meeting from before, which is that the body is sacred. It's a sacred vessel. It's a crucible for communing. We're
Mhm.
opening the microcircuitry. Yeah,
This went so fast. I have so many more questions. No, I'm going to leave it. I just want to know if there's anything either of you want to say in closing. It's been such a pleasure and a joy sitting with you today. I feel enlivened and inspired.
Mm. Yeah. Thank you, Bill. I saw a quote. We were going to, talk about the sort of Tata Drashtuhu Svarupe Vashtanam sense of resting in our true self, which is brilliant. But from a Benedictine nun, oh God, help me to believe the truth about myself, no matter how beautiful it is. Yeah.
lovely.
Gorgeous. Anything
Thank
to
you,
add?
lady.
Yeah.
No, I feel complete. What a joy to sit together, and thanks, Sherry.
My
for
pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you for doing this and inviting me.
Yeah. It's been great. Thank you so much for coming on again.
So we're just putting it out there. If you have things that you would like to be explored, to our community out there, we'd love to hear that. Yeah, keep the questions coming. We probably won't have answers, but we'll be able to, kind of just go into the adventure.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much. Until next time.
Thank
Aloha.
you.